When Detective Harding found him, shivering and alone in the alley, clutching a worn leather bag, he saw not a victim, but a perpetrator. The city had already judged him, a ghost of a man defined by suspicion and whispered accusations. But what if the shadows held a truth far more devastating than anyone could have imagined? What if the real thief wasn't who the police, or even the city, thought it was? After listening to the whole story, you will definitely share your opinion in the comments. So let's move towards the story. The biting wind of late autumn seemed to carry with it the very despair that clung to Elias Thorne. Every gust felt like a personal assault, tearing at the threadbare coat that offered little protection against the relentless chill. He moved through the labyrinthine alleys, a phantom figure swallowed by the encroaching twilight, his shoulders hunched not just against the cold, but against the invisible weight of the world's judgment. Elias was a man sculpted by hardship, his face a canvas of etched lines that spoke of sleepless nights and countless battles fought in silence. His eyes, once vibrant pools of dreams, now held a deep, weary resignation, mirroring the perpetual gloom of the city's underbelly. He wasn't always this way. There was a time when his laughter echoed freely, when his hands, now calloused and scarred, built dreams with meticulous care. He had been a carpenter, a craftsman whose passion breathed life into raw wood, transforming it into pieces of art that adorned homes and brought smiles to faces. But the world, in its cruel indifference, had a way of whittling away at a man, stripping him bare until only the raw, exposed nerves remained. His journey this evening was a pilgrimage born of desperation. The small, worn leather bag clutched tightly in his hand contained not riches, but the last vestiges of his dignity, a few precious tools, remnants of a life he once knew, now pawned and repurchased countless times just to put a meager meal on the table. Each step was a testament to his fading hope, a grim determination to survive another day in a city that seemed hell-bent on crushing him. The flickering streetlights cast long, distorted shadows, turning familiar corners into menacing corridors. The sounds of the city, usually a symphony of life, now felt like a cacophony of accusations, every distant siren a harbinger of ill fortune. He was a man adrift, a ship without a rudder, tossed about by the relentless waves of circumstance. Just 3 blocks away, in a brightly lit precinct, Detective Harding was reviewing the latest string of robberies. The targets were always small businesses, their meager earnings vanishing into the night, leaving behind a trail of despair. The modus operandi was always the same, precise, silent, leaving little to no trace. And the prime suspect, a shadowy figure seen near the scenes, always seemed to fit the description of a man down on his luck, a phantom haunting the fringes of society. Harding, a man forged in the crucible of urban crime, prided himself on his keen intuition, his ability to see beyond the obvious. But even he, with all his experience, was susceptible to the easy narrative, the convenient scapegoat. The city was on edge, the whispers of fear growing louder with each passing day, and the pressure to find the culprit was mounting. As Elias turned into a narrow alley, seeking a shortcut to his meager rented room, the unmistakable glare of a flashlight cut through the darkness, momentarily blinding him. His heart, already a fragile thing, lurched in his chest. He froze, a deer caught in headlights, every muscle tensed, ready for flight, but rooted by an inexplicable terror. A gruff voice, amplified by the confines of the alley, shattered the silence. "Stop right there. Police!" Detective Harding emerged from the shadows, his presence imposing, his eyes scanning Elias with an unnerving intensity. The worn leather bag in Elias's hand, a symbol of his desperate struggle, was immediately perceived as an item of suspicion, a silent confession of guilt. The narrative had already been written, the verdict already rendered, long before a single word was spoken. The irony was a cruel twist of fate, a brutal mockery of Elias's struggle. He, who had lost everything, was now accused of taking from others. The injustice of it all was a bitter pill, a poison seeping into his very soul. Yet he had no strength left to fight, no voice left to protest. His silence, born of exhaustion and despair, was misinterpreted as an admission, further cementing the detective's conviction. The cold, hard grip of a hand on his arm was the final punctuation mark, a physical manifestation of the crushing weight of a world that refused to see beyond the surface. The sterile environment of the police station was a stark contrast to the chaotic freedom of the streets, yet Elias felt no less trapped. The interrogation room, with its single, harsh overhead light, felt like a spotlight illuminating his every failure, every lost hope. Detective Harding sat across from him, a formidable presence, his gaze unwavering, dissecting Elias with a professional detachment that felt more like a surgical incision. Elias, slumped in the uncomfortable chair, felt the cold seep into his bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature and everything to do with the profound sense of helplessness. He wanted to speak, to explain, to unravel the tangled skein of misunderstandings, but the words wouldn't come. They were caught in his throat, choked by the years of silence and the crushing weight of a society that had already made its judgment. His eyes, fixed on a smudge on the table, reflected a deep, abiding sorrow, a silent plea for understanding that went unheard. Harding, however, saw only defiance in Elias's quietude. He had built his career on reading people, on deciphering the subtle cues that betrayed guilt or innocence. But with Elias, there was an unfamiliar blankness, a void that Harding couldn't quite penetrate. The detective laid out the evidence, circumstantial yet damning. Sightings near the crime scenes, Elias's known history of homelessness, the valuable tools in his bag, which to Harding seemed far too good for a man of Elias's apparent means. Each piece of evidence, presented with a calm, authoritative voice, felt like another nail in Elias's coffin. Harding spoke of the fear gripping the community, the need for justice, the closure he could bring. He appealed to Elias's conscience, to any shred of humanity that might remain. But Elias had long since run out of conscience to appeal to, his own having been flayed raw by life's relentless scourges. As the hours bled into one another, Elias's mind drifted, seeking refuge in the fragments of a past that now seemed impossibly distant. He remembered Sarah, her eyes the color of warm honey, her laughter a melody that could chase away any shadow. She had believed in him, in his hands, in the dreams he wove from wood. They had planned a small workshop, a place where the scent of sawdust and fresh timber would mingle with the promise of a future. But then the illness had struck, swift and merciless, stripping her of her vitality, leaving Elias with nothing but the echoes of her breath and a mountain of medical debt. He had sold everything, piece by painful piece, his tools, his home, his very identity, in a futile attempt to keep her flame alive. When she was gone, the world had lost its color, its purpose. He had fallen, not with a crash, but with a slow, agonizing descent into the abyss of destitution, a man stripped bare, left with nothing but the memory of love and the haunting presence of loss. The tools in his bag, the very ones Harding saw as evidence of crime, were not stolen. They were his, meticulously cared for, even in his poverty. They were the last tangible link to the man he once was, to the dreams he had once dared to dream. He carried them not for larceny, but for solace, a desperate clinging to a past that offered fleeting moments of warmth in a present devoid of it. He would sometimes pull them out in the quiet solitude of the alleyways, running his calloused fingers over the smooth wood of a chisel handle, remembering the feel of sawdust between his fingers, the rhythmic rasp of a plane, the satisfying thud of a finished piece. They were his anchors, his silent companions in a world that had forgotten him. Harding, growing impatient with Elias's continued silence, leaned forward, his voice a low, insistent rumble. "Look, Elias, we know you've been struggling. We can help you, but you need to tell us what happened. You need to confess." The word confess hung in the air, heavy with accusation, yet it registered little with Elias. He was beyond confession, beyond pleading. He was simply existing, a raw nerve exposed to the relentless currents of fate. He had nothing left to lose, not even his freedom. For what was freedom to a man who had already lost everything that mattered? The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city, a city that continued its relentless march, oblivious to the quiet tragedy unfolding within its walls. The relentless interrogation continued, a monotonous rhythm of questions and silence, each minute stretching into an eternity for Elias. Detective Harding, though outwardly stoic, felt a flicker of something he rarely experienced: unease. Elias's unyielding silence wasn't the typical resistance of a guilty man. There was a profound, almost spiritual emptiness about him, a man so broken that even the fear of prison seemed to hold no sway. Harding had seen it before, this utter surrender, but it usually came from those who had nothing left to lose and often little left to live for. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, a rare breach in his carefully constructed professional demeanor. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the evidence, on the undeniable facts. Yet, a nagging voice, faint but persistent, whispered of a truth that lay deeper, beneath the surface of what was apparent. Back in the dimly lit, small-time pawn shop, Mr. Henderson, a man whose existence was defined by the clink of coins and the weight of human desperation, meticulously polished a silver locket. He was a creature of habit and routine, his days a predictable cycle of appraisals and transactions. But tonight, a tiny seed of discomfort had been planted in his mind. He recalled Elias's last visit, just a few days prior. Elias hadn't pawned tools this time, but a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a piece of such delicate artistry that it seemed out of place amidst the shop's usual collection of forgotten relics. Henderson had offered a pittance, knowing its true value far exceeded the paltry sum. Elias, without a word, had accepted it, his eyes holding a profound, unreadable sadness that Henderson couldn't quite shake. The memory of that bird, and the inexplicable sorrow in Elias's eyes, now pricked at Henderson's conscience, a rare phenomenon for a man who had seen too much human suffering to be easily moved. Meanwhile, in a quiet, upscale neighborhood across town, a woman named Clara sat by her window, gazing out at the rain-slicked streets. Clara was a woman of means, her life comfortable and seemingly untouched by hardship. Yet, a subtle disquiet gnawed at her. Her younger brother, Daniel, was spiraling. His addiction, a ravenous beast, had taken hold of his life, turning him into a stranger. He had been unusually agitated lately, furtively pawning items that weren't his, always vague about their origins. Just last week, he had come home late, his eyes wide with a manic energy, carrying a small, worn leather bag. He had quickly stashed it away, muttering something about a lucky find. Clara, ever the protector, had tried to intervene, to pull him back from the precipice, but his resistance was fierce, fueled by the relentless demands of his addiction. She loved him fiercely, a love that was both a blessing and a curse, blinding her to the full extent of his transgressions, or perhaps simply unwilling to confront the harsh reality. As the night wore on, Harding, frustrated by Elias's silence, began to review the broader context of the recent robberies. He noticed a subtle pattern, a recurring detail that had previously been dismissed as insignificant, a faint, almost imperceptible scratch mark consistent across several of the targeted businesses near the point of entry. It was a detail too precise, too specific to be random, a signature left by someone methodical. He remembered the reports, dismissed by others as quirks, about a fleeting figure seen near some of the crime scenes, not the disheveled man Elias was, but someone quicker, more agile, a shadow that moved with a restless urgency. The pieces, once scattered and disparate, began to coalesce, forming a different picture than the one he had initially constructed. Elias didn't fit the pattern of meticulousness, of speed. His entire demeanor screamed exhaustion, not cunning. The seeds of doubt, once mere whispers, began to take root, blossoming into a tangible suspicion that gnawed at the edges of his certainty. He looked at Elias again, really looked at him, seeing not a thief, but a man drowning in a sorrow so profound it had become his prison. The truth, Harding realized with a jolt, was rarely simple and often far more complex than the easy narrative that first presented itself. The internal shift in Detective Harding was palpable, a subtle but significant turning point in the silent drama unfolding in the interrogation room. He pushed away the official reports, the neat stacks of evidence that had once seemed so conclusive. His gaze, now stripped of its initial certainty, searched Elias's hollowed eyes, seeking not guilt but understanding. He saw the tremor in Elias's hands, the almost imperceptible flinch when a loud noise echoed from the hallway. This wasn't the cunning of a thief. It was the raw vulnerability of a man utterly broken. Harding thought of the detailed scratch marks at the crime scenes, a consistency that spoke of a specific, perhaps even obsessive, method. Elias, with his slow, deliberate movements, his air of profound weariness, simply didn't fit that profile. The pieces of the puzzle began to reconfigure themselves in Harding's mind, a new, unsettling image starting to emerge. He shifted his approach, his voice softening, shedding the authoritative tone that had dominated their exchange. "Elias," he began, the name now spoken with a hint of genuine inquiry. "Tell me about the tools. The ones in your bag." Elias, startled by the unexpected change in demeanor, slowly, painstakingly, lifted his gaze. His voice, when it finally emerged, was a rasp, unused and fragile, like a forgotten instrument being played for the first time in years. "They were my father's," he whispered, the words carrying the weight of generations, of a legacy lost. "And his fathers before him. We were carpenters. Always." He spoke of the scent of cedar and pine, of the satisfaction of shaping raw wood, of the quiet pride of creating something enduring with one's own hands. He spoke of Sarah, not with a burst of grief, but with the quiet ache of a wound that had never truly healed. He described her smile, her unwavering belief in his talent, the dreams they had spun together, fragile as cobwebs, but beautiful nonetheless. He explained how the illness had devoured their savings, piece by painful piece, leaving him with nothing but memories and the unshakable burden of debt. He told of selling his home, his workshop, even some of his cherished tools, just to buy another day for her, another moment of fading hope. The wooden bird, pawned just days ago, was the last gift he had ever carved for her, a small, intricate symbol of their shared love, sold only out of the most desperate necessity. Meanwhile, Clara, driven by a gnawing suspicion and a mother's intuition, finally confronted Daniel. The small leather bag he had been guarding so fiercely lay half-hidden beneath his bed. The moment she touched it, a wave of cold dread washed over her. It was heavy, too heavy for clothes, and something hard rattled inside. Her hands trembled as she unzipped it, revealing a collection of small, specialized tools, a set of delicate lock picks, a precision screwdriver, a tiny, powerful flashlight. Tools that were not his, tools that screamed of illicit activity. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized some of the items from news reports about the recent robberies. Her heart sank, a sickening plunge into the abyss of truth. The casual way he had dismissed his late-night excursions, the evasive answers, the frantic energy that pulsed beneath his skin, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The realization was a devastating blow, a brutal awakening to the dark path her beloved brother had chosen. The protective bubble of denial she had built around him shattered, leaving her exposed to the harsh, unforgiving light of reality. Back at the precinct, Harding listened to Elias's story, a narrative woven with threads of hardship, love, and loss. It wasn't a confession of crime, but a profound unveiling of a life lived on the fringes, a testament to resilience in the face of relentless adversity. The pieces that had previously seemed to incriminate Elias now painted a picture of profound innocence. The tools, far from being implements of theft, were the last tangible connections to a vanished life, cherished relics of a craftsman's pride. Harding felt a wave of shame wash over him, a stinging recognition of his own hasty judgment. He had seen a thief where there was only a victim, a man crushed by the very system he was sworn to protect. He knew, with a certainty that transcended mere evidence, that the real thief was still out there, operating in the shadows, while an innocent man sat before him, stripped of everything but his quiet dignity. The path forward became clear, a path of rectification and justice, a path that would lead him away from the easy assumptions and towards the elusive, often painful, truth. The realization hit Detective Harding with the force of a physical blow, a cold, hard truth that cut through his ingrained assumptions. He looked at Elias, truly saw him now, not as a suspect, but as a casualty of circumstances, a man whose dignity had been stripped away by an indifferent world. The shame was a bitter taste in his mouth, a sharp contrast to the self-righteousness he'd worn just hours before. He knew, with an undeniable certainty, that he had to right this wrong, not just for Elias, but for the very integrity of the justice he was sworn to uphold. The case, which had seemed so straightforward, was now anything but. Harding immediately shifted gears. He called his most trusted analyst, Sarah Jenkins, a sharp, observant woman with a knack for seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. He laid out the new theory, the subtle inconsistencies that had nagged at him, the distinct scratch marks, the fleeting descriptions of a different kind of perpetrator. Sarah listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. She pulled up security footage from near the latest robbery, meticulously slow-motioning the blurry figures in the background. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, cross-referencing, zooming in, enhancing. And then, a flicker of movement, a figure darting away from a darkened storefront, carrying a distinctive, familiar-looking bag. It wasn't Elias. It was a younger, more agile silhouette, moving with a frantic energy that spoke of desperation, not the quiet, weary despair of the man sitting in the interrogation room. Meanwhile, Clara, now armed with the devastating truth, faced the agonizing decision of how to proceed. Her brother, Daniel, was her only family, a bond forged in childhood and tested by years of his struggles. But the discovery of the tools, the undeniable link to the robberies, had shattered her world. Love warred with a fierce sense of morality. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant tearing her own heart out. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone, the weight of the call a physical burden. She dialed the number for the police, her voice breaking as she began to explain, her words a hesitant confession not of her own crime, but of a brother's desperate descent. It was a call that would irrevocably alter Daniel's life, and her own, but it was a step she knew was necessary for justice to prevail, and perhaps for Daniel to finally confront the demons that drove him. Back at the station, Sarah's painstaking work yielded results. The security footage, enhanced and cross-referenced, began to reveal a consistent pattern, a distinct gait, a restless energy. The figure was undeniably Daniel. And then, the ultimate corroboration, a clear shot of the worn leather bag, clutched in his hand, looking exactly like the one Elias had been found with, but this one undeniably belonging to Daniel. The irony was bitter. The very bag that had condemned Elias was now the key to his exoneration. Harding felt a surge of grim satisfaction. He had been right to trust his gut, to look beyond the obvious. He walked back into the interrogation room, the weight of a different kind of burden on his shoulders now. Elias looked up, his eyes still holding that profound resignation. "Elias," Harding said, his voice quiet but firm, "you're free to go." The words hung in the air, foreign and unbelievable. Elias blinked, a slow, disbelieving movement. He didn't jump up, didn't demand an apology. He simply sat there, absorbing the words, the sudden absence of accusation. Harding explained, briefly, about the new evidence, about the real culprit being identified. He didn't offer grand apologies, knowing words were insufficient. Instead, he simply extended a hand, a gesture of quiet respect, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice. Elias slowly, almost tentatively, reached out and took it, a silent exchange of understanding passing between the two men. One, a detective who had almost made a grave mistake, and the other, a man who had endured the harshest of life's blows, now offered a glimmer of hope. The world outside the station still carried its shadows, but for Elias, a tiny sliver of light had finally pierced through the overwhelming darkness. The crisp morning air felt different to Elias as he stepped out of the police station. It wasn't just the chill. It was the air of possibility, of fragile, almost forgotten sensation. The city, still bustling with its indifferent rhythm, seemed to hold a flicker of promise instead of just threat. Detective Harding, true to his word, had quietly arranged for Elias to retrieve his tools, not as confiscated evidence, but as personal property. Elias clutched the worn leather bag, its familiar weight a comfort, a tangible link to a past that no longer felt entirely lost. He had no grand destination, no immediate plan, but the crushing weight of false accusation had lifted, leaving behind a subtle, unsettling lightness. He was free, but freedom, he realized, was a vast, open space when you had nowhere to go. Meanwhile, Clara watched from a distance as her brother, Daniel, was taken into custody. The scene was heartbreakingly familiar, a repeat of countless fears realized. Yet, amidst the profound sorrow, there was a faint, almost imperceptible sense of relief. The secret was out, the destructive cycle broken. She knew the path ahead for Daniel would be long and arduous, a journey through the painful landscape of addiction and accountability. But now, at least, there was a chance for healing, a possibility of redemption that had been impossible while he lived in the shadows of his actions. She had chosen justice, not just for the victims of his crimes, but for Daniel himself, hoping that confronting the truth, no matter how painful, would ultimately set him free. Harding, back at his desk, began the paperwork for Daniel's case. The details were grim, the evidence clear, but amidst the legalities, a different kind of satisfaction settled within him. He had faced his own prejudice, confronted his initial assumptions, and ultimately found the truth. It was a reminder that justice wasn't always about convictions and arrests. Sometimes it was about seeing the unseen, about listening to the unspoken stories, and about rectifying the errors of judgment. He knew the department might question his initial actions, but the quiet certainty of knowing he had freed an innocent man outweighed any professional scrutiny. As the days turned into weeks, a small, unexpected chain of events began to unfold. Mr. Henderson, the pawn shop owner, troubled by the memory of the wooden bird and Elias's profound sadness, sought him out. He returned the carved bird, refusing payment, his gruff demeanor softened by a rare display of empathy. He even offered Elias a small, temporary job, organizing his cluttered back room, a task that, while humble, allowed Elias to work with his hands again, to feel the rhythm of purpose. It was a fragile beginning, a tiny spark in the vast darkness of his past, but it was a beginning nonetheless. Elias, with the wooden bird back in his possession, found himself carving again in the quiet moments of the evening. His hands, though still scarred by hardship, rediscovered their forgotten skill. He started with small pieces, simple forms, but with each cut, each smooth stroke of the chisel, a flicker of his old self began to return. The police thought he was a thief, but the real thief was addiction, stealing not just material possessions, but peace, dignity, and hope. Elias had been a victim of circumstance, caught in the undertow of another's struggle. But in the quiet resilience of his spirit, in the kindness that found its way to him through unexpected channels, a transformation had begun. He was no longer just a man who had lost everything. He was a man slowly, painstakingly, beginning to rebuild, carving a new path forward, one silent, hopeful stroke at a time. The city still hummed with its endless stories, but this one, quiet and profound, was a testament to the enduring power of truth, the unexpected pathways of kindness, and the quiet strength of the human spirit to find its way back from the brink.